Thank you all for being here. There might be some folks from my church that come a little bit later. So, we just had Big Bazaar Day morning. And, so a couple of them snuck away. And, others said they wanted to come. Also, my son, who was in the first two slides and doesn't know it. Maybe on his way, maybe he will show up before the program is over. So if you have sons, you may know what I'm talking about. So anyhow, I have manuscript. I'm probably not going to stick to it. I'm a pastor, so I always feel like, let us pray, let us bow. All right. So how many people are familiar at all with this story? You raise your hand. Yeah. Okay. This did take 30 years from the beginning to finally finishing it this spring. And part of the reason is because I worked with another lady. If you've ever collaborated on anything, sometimes that could be challenging because you have your own vision for the project or things that you really want to make sure are in there. And my co-author definitely had the tale that she wanted to tell, which I'll explain. And what I wanted to accomplish was to tell my family story, since this was about them. I thought it would be helpful for people to know more about them so that I just didn't want them to be the victims of one really bad night of crime. I think those, we hear those in the news, we never know really anything about them, but they lived this full, long life, and so many in their family. They had 13 kids, 16 of them born. And so they had lived in this area where this is set for probably about 60 years. So, and their kids obviously married and there were grandkids, and a lot of the people up there are related to. So I was in Oskaloosa, it was about a month ago, not quite a month ago, and we had about 50 people there. And a lot of them had ties to the book, or the people even who were in the book. Like the great grandson of one of the characters that I will probably talk about, Lon Myers, was there. And we spent quite a bit of time talking because Lon was engaged to my great aunt, who was at the center of this whole ordeal. So that was really interesting after 100 years. So he looked at me and said, we were almost related, as they almost got married. So anyhow, all right. So 30-year project. And I will just explain, let's see, because you probably want to know who the people are. So these first two on the end, the youngest ones, these would be cousins of mine. So the older fella here is my great grandfather, Thomas Andrew Hurley. In the book, he's TA. This would be my dad's dad. So my dad's grandpa. And then here is his youngest son, Ernest. And both of these men died in the farmhouse fire, which was the crime or the event. The woman here is one of his daughters. She was not in the fire. Okay. This is the only picture that we have of the house and people in front of it. And I think this was not very long before, actually, this happened in 1923. Okay. And then my co-author was Delila Mize McCabe, and we called her Lila. Okay, so my son's not here yet, so I can't embarrass him. This is Gannon. And so when the book started, literally, as I got a phone call one day, he was sitting in his high chair. It wasn't this precise moment, but I found a photo of him in his high chair, a little bit younger, and he was actually 2 years old. I remember that memory very clearly, getting a phone call from my dad. So I took this, I think last year, just to show the progression of time. And again, to embarrass him a bit, but he is now 35. So he's also a very talented writer in his own right. So does anybody here do genealogy? Yeah, okay. Now we have ancestry.com. It's all online. You can search for many things without going there in person. When we started, and my dad got bit by the genealogy bug, as many people do when they turn their like 50s or 60s, he started on paper. with a typewriter with whiteout, as you can see. So there's all of his notes and some highlighting, and this is actually a sheet from the family with some of the kids. So that was long ago when we started, and he compiled a couple of these books, and I actually put them online. So I would just say, if you're interested in genealogy, because this book is kind of triggering that to some people, just go to familysearch.org because it is free. It is a free resource, and there's already a lot there. Until you get into it, I would not recommend you go ahead and buy a nice big ancestry.com program or subscription. So I became interested in this side of the family. One Christmas, my dad gave us these photos, and they were of his dad when he lived up in Colorado, and he was kind of like a mountain man. It's before he got married. He didn't get married until he was 40. And he was the younger Tom Hurley in the book. And it's kind of hard to see, but he's actually holding up a bear right here. I don't see. There's the snout. And he's got his hand on it. And I looked at these because I never met him. He died in 1955, 10 years before I was born. And his wife died like three days before. I never knew either one of them. They're both natural deaths, by the way. But so I started looking at all the details, like the guns, and there's, I think, a clock and these bottles. I wanted to know more about him. Here he is with the bear. There's actually the bear up here. And then his tall skis and his cabin. And then over here, he's next to a tent. There's rifles. I think I saw there was a knife stuck in a piece of wood and a bottle of probably whiskey, knowing him. But you can even see the laces on his boots. So he was a hunter, a trapper, a fisherman, like wade up a really icy river in Colorado, catch trout. And he did all this, and also panning for gold. He tried to strike it rich before he got married. So I was very intrigued. And then I found out more about the family. So through the photos, this is my grandpa, younger Tom. This is Genevieve, Aunt Jennie, who is at the center of the story. This is Ernest, the guy on the cover, although he's younger here. And then these are two of their siblings. So I always thought George was very handsome. He was an unmarried uncle, and spent time up in Colorado with my grandpa. So again, I was very interested in that. Dad talked about playing on a bearskin rug and running his fingers in where the teeth were as a kid. And his dad had traps, and his mom made him get rid of them. So yeah. Okay. When I was in high school, and here's Dad right there. Some of you know my dad. This is cousin Les. We took a trip up to Topeka, and I mentioned this in the back of the book. This is it's on the shores of Perry Lake. And again, he is interested in family genealogy, and I go along. So Lester takes us to this place next to Perry Lake, and it is the ground where the family had their farm and lived there for these 60 years, and where the farmhouse fire took place. We went to cemeteries. We saw where some were buried, Tom, TA, with some of them that died in the fire. I didn't know what we were talking about, what was going on, but at some point it was said something about, well, this is where the fire happened. And I said, what fire? I never knew there was a fire in our family. And so Lester, who was more of a contemporary of the youngest brother, started talking and sharing about, yes, how there was this farmhouse fire one night and it had claimed 3 members of our family. And I said, I never heard anything about this. Dad never said anything about it in our household. My siblings never knew. He had had quite a bit of sorrow in his family, so I think just talking about that probably, they didn't have details, but that generation, you just don't talk about things like that too much. But he also didn't have a whole lot of information. So then he and I went to the Historical Society and went through all those newspapers that were in bound volumes, and we looked through whole bunch of microfiche and microfilm. And on the way home, I started reading the copies. And some of that verbiage talked about things not being as they should be if it were just an accident. And so I remember turning to my dad and saying, Dad, I don't think this was any accident. And he said, I think you're right. So he'd always heard that it was maybe a lightning strike, or that somebody forgot to turn down oil lighting system at night. But again, from the reporting that happened right after that, we just thought, yeah, we don't think that this was an accident. So that was my first encounter. Also, when we were there, Jane, who was here on the left, pointed across the lake to a rooftop, and she said, oh, that's where this woman takes care of older people. I said, in her home? She said, yeah, kind of like a nursing home, a retirement home. I guess that's what you do in a small community when you don't have nursing homes. That ended up being my co-author 10 years later. And I would stay in that home and we would go visit and I would do writing there with her. But little did I know, we were there that day. So people here know where Prairie Lake is. Yeah, it is kind of in between Topeka over here. Lawrence is down here. It's one of the Corps of Engineer lakes. All the big lakes, all the fun lakes were put in by the Corps about the same time, 50s, 60s, somewhere thereabouts. This is over on that board, but I just wanted to point out the lake was not there at the time. This is a road that goes past some sailboats and a marina, and we would go up here and turn down a road and come down. And this is where those photos were taken on the old home place. Lila lived over here. Then I would come to find out about the timber and about a man named Old Nate, and about Huber School, which is supposed to be where my Aunt Jennie and some of her siblings would come when the water was low. The lake wasn't there, but they still had to get across it. And so Huber School is also in the book. So Lila was concerned about, and this house is still there. Lila was concerned about telling Old Nate's story. She had written, oh, hello. How are you?
Good. Sorry, we're late.
This is my son Gannon and his wife Amanda. Everybody say hello.
Hello.
So now we gotta go back. Okay. So I explained to them before you came that you were in the high chair when Grandpa called me and told me that this woman, there was an article in the Topeka paper that she had written a story about her family event, this tragedy, and you were in the high chair. So I actually found a picture of you in the high chair.
Okay.
And this is when the book was finally completed. So, yeah. I had to just embarrass you a little bit there. Okay. So Lila wanted to tell the story of Old Nate, who was this neighbor who had grown up with the family, gone to school with them, and what she said was that basically Old Nate had a huge crush for that. He carried a torch for Aunt Jennie all of his life, but she was just kind of out of his reach. The way that he's portrayed in the story is that he is something of a confidant, okay? And she returns to him when she needs a sounding board, okay? So she had written a short story, and the article that I will show you soon she was looking for somebody to lengthen this book, short story of hers, into a book form. So that was the article, and I'll show it to you here. I thought this was very interesting. I just found this recently, local newspaper article that came out right after. And so my grandpa Tom, the mountain guy, settled here, became a railroader. And so he learns about, I think he received maybe a telegram, but then he reads in the local newspaper about his family. And he also, this article talks about how he found out It was not until they read the report of the happening in Evening Kansas that the family, meaning him and my grandma, knew that foul play was suspected as the cause. Imagine reading that in the newspaper, your local newspaper. Yeah. So, yeah, that was something kind of interesting I found. This was quoted a lot in quite a few articles throughout Kansas. And it points to the fact that something had happened, a bit of Cape blood, and the fact that 2 shotguns were found other than their usual places formed the slight clues upon which Jefferson County officers are working in an effort to solve the mystery of the deaths. T.A. Hurley, Ernest, and Genevieve, whose charred bodies were taken from the ruins of their home 5 miles southwest of Meriden yesterday morning. So that was picked up a lot of newspapers across the state. Then 3 years later, and I have the article over there, the story goes national because it's unsolved. And this is very sensationalized. It's a Hearst publication called The American Weekly. When you might remember the story of yellow journalism when they were fighting Pulitzer and Hearst to sell newspapers. And so the more sensational, the better. So they depicted Aunt Genevieve, Aunt Jennie, dragging the body of a woman her body was supposedly stolen from the KU Med School anatomy lab. So that was yet another crazy thing that came in. Well, one did disappear, but we have no idea if there was any connection to that. Okay. So she was a school teacher. She had taught in Kansas City, Kansas, and she had even become assistant principal at Horace Mann in Kansas City, Kansas. And then for some unknown reason, we're going to guess it's because Jennie was hot-headed and probably said the wrong thing to the wrong person and lost her job. We don't know. She comes back to the farm and takes care of her dad and her brother before he's married. So there was even the mystery about that. So somebody went to the trouble to write this article, and it was, you can see it's a whole page. And this was the first news magazine that we had in the United States. It would go inserted into your newspaper like the Parade on the weekends. Okay, so that's 4 years later. And then I found through newspapers.com that it went national again at least 2 more times. Yeah, in the 30s and in the 40s, just because of the story. So I go up to Perry Lake again with my folks, 1983. That's me and my mom, and I continue to visit there. It's actually a peaceful place. It's meant to be a campground area, and I often wondered, what if people knew they came to camp there that this was the scene of this supposed horrible crime? Would they be able to sleep, you know? But Menninger, who had their hospital up in Topeka, maintained that area, and so if you were an employee, you could go there and stay or camp or picnic, and I just went in and out. I didn't care. I just went in and out. So I would get arrested there when I was in college and needed to get away from all the noisy door slamming and everybody yelling. So when the phone rings and Gannon is in his high chair, then Dad is on the phone and he's telling me about this woman, Lila McCabe, the lady, remember, who lived across the lake. And this ran in the Topeka paper, and she is wanting somebody to lengthen her book, or her short story into book. And my first thought is, if anybody's going to do it, it should be a family member, you know? I wanted to make sure that they would be treated respectfully, and not sensationally, but also to just tell the tale of who they were. And my dad had a whole bunch of information that kind of brought that whole family to life. Autobiographies of some of his dad's siblings that could talk about what that was like growing up on that farm. So we went up and met Lila, Dad and I. And I can still remember when we pulled into her place, she was waiting for us down at the corner because she thought we'd get lost. So we go across, and here we are there. This is a farm ground, and here's the bridge that I pointed out. This is Dad, and Lila is telling Dad everything. And Lila knew so many details. If you can imagine somebody knowing the most, well, what, some of the most private things of your family that a stranger knows. It was very surreal. And she was clearly an authority on it. And if you know my dad, anybody here knew my dad? My dad was an authority, amen. So can you imagine what this conversation was like? Yeah, one authority telling the other authority how it was. So you can see how far I was away with my camera. No, that was over here. No, this was over here. Oh, this is what I heard. Yeah. So they had a good old time. So I have not been back out to this area, probably since my youngest son was born in '97, because there was a flood and there were trees that grew up around there. But when you can go, like in the spring, they tell me still you can see the foundation outline, and they can dig up shards of pottery and china, which we did while we were there, because they basically just you know, plotted over once everything had happened. So okay, so it started with these two. Thomas Andrew, TA, was an Irish immigrant, came to the area to Kansas. His wife, Mary, her family had come, like so many of our families do, in covered wagons from Ohio or Pennsylvania along what is now I-70, which I still think that probably if your family came that way, then we were probably neighbors all along the way, you know, because we all end up here. So that was the father and the mother. Right before second son was born, we thought we had the makings of a book. But I could tell Lila wasn't like 100% with it. And honestly, I wanted to be older than my great aunt Jennie to try to get some perspective on her, and I was younger. I'm still not sure that I can follow her intent or thinking because it was so different than mine. Anyhow, they did an article on us with the pending book, which did not come out at that time. So, and then about a year later, Lila passed away. Unfortunately, she had cancer. This is her daughter, Chris, and Chris was in Oskaloosa with me and accepted an award or an honor for moms for being Jefferson County author. So Lila, you know, she was just very exuberant. She was very loving. She would draw you in. Have you ever met people that you can't not like them because they won't let you not like them? Yeah, that was Lila. She would just look you in the eyes. She would hold your hand. Am I telling that right? Yeah. So she and her husband Charlie were like grandparents to my son Gan. She's very sweet. She's very creative. She had taken care of this old Nate Isaac in his home and had hoped to bring him into her house to take care of him, but he passed away first. So. And then I went on with my life. I had to go back to work full time, and I worked at Associate Advertising. I had this lovely window right here. I worked with Patty on the front row. That was a great job. And then I felt the call to ministry. So that was another kind of diversion from writing the book. And this was a wedding that I did, one of my first appointments out in the country, which was very interesting. So. And then we get back to the book. So let me talk about Old Nate some more. I really tried to develop that character because so much of the story focuses on him that Lila wanted to tell. He's a very colorful character. When we were in Oskaloosa, we had the opportunity to go to church in town. We met a lady who knew him, and she said, "Oh yes, I remember him. I remember where he lived." She showed us, I'd forgotten where the house was in town. She said he would hang his overalls up on the wall, and then on a nail above that, he would hang his skillet, and the grease from the skillet would drip down onto his overalls. So Old Nate was known for wearing very dirty overalls, and probably he was quite aromatic. Yeah, and they said that he would either burn or bury those overalls and probably wouldn't wash them at all, and they would just go buy a new pair. But have you also noticed in life, sometimes there are these people who don't seem to have anything, and then when they die, you find out they had oodles of money and land? That was old Nate. So he never married and he kept trading his land. And sometimes he was generous. You'll read in the book where he was generous and gave Lila, her husband, traded it for like $1 or something, the land where they built their house on. So, but usually he was a crotchety old guy who didn't want anybody to bother him. And I really worked hard to develop that character. So I hope you enjoy reading about him in the story. There's a lot of scenes in there with Lila and her grandkids. And Lila, again, remember how I said it was very hard not to like or love her? Well, old Nate had that problem too. You know, she wouldn't give up on him and she kept going and she was feeding him homemade food. And occasionally he would get mad, he would growl at her. And then they would kind of, you know, the dust would settle and they would talk a little bit. And then she would go back to spending time with him, with her husband. And, you know, Charlie would shave him. And so a lot of it is that relationship in there. Slowly he starts telling her, because she knows about this fire. And slowly he starts telling her what he knows. She prods him, like, did you know Jennie Hurley? Oh, yes, I knew Jennie Hurley. And he kind of alludes to the fact he wanted to marry her. And so Lila says, well, why didn't you marry her? And he says, well, because by the time I got a rubber tired buggy, you know, everybody else had one or something like that. So there's some very particular wording in there that's exactly what Lila told me. So there's a lot of facts in the story, things that I either found or heard. I interviewed people who were similar age to Great Aunt Jennie and to him back in the 90s. And they were able to tell me all kinds of wonderful details. So this is my great aunt Genevieve, Jennie Hurley, who we believe her original name was plain old Jane, but she wanted to be so much more, okay? And so here she is, she's a farm gal. And in the book, you see her, she's got sights on going to Kansas City. She wants something bigger and better. And so she does end up there. And we found recently where she was very artistic, very creative. She was a painter. She was a singer. She and her brother would sing in all kinds of funerals. But we also think that she sang in speakeasies. And part of the family rumor was that she may have been hanging out with a Pendergast group. You know about the Pendergast?
The mom.
Well, they weren't the mob, but they were very close to them, had very close connections. So when we get down to thinking about theories about what happened, you know, you might just keep that in your mind, you know, because in some ways this looks like a mob hit. But I don't say anything in the book about that because I don't know that maybe there might be some Pendergast family still around. You know what I'm saying? So that was just kind of a little rumblings in the family, what my dad's cousin Lester mentioned. Yeah. So Aunt Genevieve, it appeared, was living something of a double life. She came back to the farm. She was teaching Sunday school for young girls. But as I interviewed one of my dad's cousins who was older, she remembered as a girl sleeping upstairs, and the scene is in the book. She was sleeping upstairs one night in Aunt Genevieve's bed together because they had double up, family was there. And in the middle of the night, she felt cold and she reached over and Genevieve was not there. And she looked out the window. I don't know how the bed got cold. This is her story, okay? But anyhow, she looked out the window, rubbed the pane to look out, and Aunt Jennie was getting into a car that had pulled up, and the door closes and she ducks down. She appears the next morning, probably making breakfast, but this cousin of dad's has no idea what happened. But we do think she may have been leading this double life. Yeah. Still going back to Kansas City, still mingling with some people. And her father was complaining in the book that she kept getting these letters from all these men. And of course, they burn up in the fire, so there's no evidence of that. But we do know that she was engaged to at least 2 men at the time of the fire. Okay. There was a farmer, Lon Myers, who was wealthy. And their wedding was supposed to happen in just a few weeks, 2 or 3 weeks. We don't think she really wanted to marry Lon because again, what was she gonna be? A farmer's wife. And not that's a bad thing, but for her, that was so ordinary, right? And the other thing is that right before the fire, there's a guy that comes to talk to her. And her dad says, "Did you tell him you're going to get married? That you have a fiance and the wedding date is soon?" "Oh, yeah, yeah." So that after the fire, a package comes addressed to her, and it is yet another diamond ring.
Oh.
And she had showed the guy that she was supposed to marry a handful of diamond rings right before the fire, as if to say, "I want something bigger, a bigger stone that is in these." So she wanted a diamond ring as big around as the end of your little finger. Yeah, was her goal. So the family thinks probably that she was involved. I've never believed she was responsible for the whole thing of killing her dad and her brother. Certainly if there was a body that was in the shed, as the article suggests, over there, that had been stolen over at Kansas City, a woman, even my size, could not have dragged another body clear across, from the shed to the house and up the stairs and into the house. Yeah, that would be impossible for one person to do. What we do know is that they found the 2 men's bodies. It was pretty obvious. And I talked to a guy who his dad helped pull out things from the house, including the bodies, for uncovering them. And he said that they found, he always wore overalls, the youngest brother, and they found those clasps from the overalls embedded right here. So they knew that that was Ernest. And Grandpa was back in a bedroom that he always slept in. But again, they found things like blood, which you should not find in a fire. They found guns that were not where they were supposed to be. And in this one account, it talks about how there was gasoline that was carried from a barrel out in the yard into the house because there was like a zigzag of fire at some point. And that would explain why there was such an intense fireball and explosion when the first guy that comes along, a farmer who was just coming home on his horse, who discovered it. It just all of a sudden everything exploded. So those are some of the details that are in the book. So another thing was Jennie in the fire? Because not long after, maybe a year later, there was a woman who lived in Buell, Idaho, and she had been neighbors of the family. And Jennie had taught piano lessons for her daughter. And that woman reported back, it took her some time, but she reported that a woman had come into a store in Buell, Idaho, where she was. And she saw her and she looked like Aunt Jennie. And so she called her name out. "Oh, Jennie Hurley or Genevieve Hurley." And if it was you or me and it was mistaken, you would not have done what she did, because this woman could have been Aunt Genevieve, covers her face, shrieks, and then runs out. And then gets into a car. And by the time the woman gets to the front of the store and looks out, it's sped away. So other people reported seeing her like in Chicago. There were other places. So that's the lingering question too. Is she actually the one in her own grave, or did she get away? So, and what was the conflict? There was conflict between her and her dad because he owed her money for helping to expand the house some. He also owed her money for either chicken or egg money. He had promised this to her. But then we believe he just said, "Well, it's in my will," or the thought was that her new husband was going to get that money, but she wasn't. So I believe she wanted to escape, to leave, maybe with another person, yet another man, and make a new life. So, but we will never know. We will never know. So, this is another scene from a happier time of the family. Not all of them were together at one time. If you've been a part of a really big family, you know that, that's often the case, but this is supposed to be Ernest when he's younger. And this is, Thomas Andrew, TA. We did talk to, my dad and I talked to a lawyer and his wife in Oskaloosa, and he remembered him coming into town and bellowing out, "I'm T.A. Hurley from Rock Creek Below," and pardon me, he says, "and I'm the biggest damn sheep herder or sheep farmer that there is in the area." So he's not a very big guy, but he was kind of swaggering. And then this is his wife, Mary. She's obviously turned because one of these kids over here is doing something, right? These are some of the grandkids. I think this is one of these over here is Maud, the one who talked about being upstairs and sleeping with her, and she leaves. Either this or this is Jennie. And this is one of the brothers-in-law. I think it might be her right there. Anyhow. Yeah, so, I think I've covered some of the possible explanations for what could have happened. Do you have any thoughts or questions you want to share?
You mentioned, I think a body in the shed, so is that who they think that was Jennie?
So if you follow the thinking of the stolen body from,
Well,
the KU anatomy lab, basically. And I will just say, at one point, she did not live too far from that facility. It became KU Med School, and so she lived in Kansas City, Kansas. And she probably had connections with some of the folks in the area. Or the gentleman she might have been with, who might have been from Kansas City, could have. So, yeah, it's a wild theory. Because then you have to think about somebody putting that body there and then putting the body in the fire. Yeah, so it takes some maneuvering to get there, but that's one of the theories, so. Yeah. And also that body was burned beyond recognition to the point that they did not know if it was even a human being. And you might think about 1923 in forensics, there wasn't much really to go on. So they weren't sure. It might have been an animal, could have been, a cow or a calf.
So it might have been embalmed
It could have
to burn
been,
that much.
it could have been, or somebody could have just dumped a bunch of gasoline on top of that one in particular. Yeah. Yeah,
Any theories, you're saying that you logically don't think she could have drugged that body anywhere by herself?
I don't
Any
think so.
theories on who may have been the accomplice?
Well, I think there was yet another man. And the reason why is because there was something, and this is also in the book that Lila told me, that Nate told her. He said, "I would rather see Jennie Hurley die or dead than to go away with a complete stranger." He said that to her many times.
old Nate.
Old Nate, her confidant friend. So the theory that a lot of people up there have, still this day, is that Nate was involved, not that he did it. But you could go there in your mind too. Although I've never seen like a MO for him. But I think he and the people there think that he came down, maybe found what had happened, and then to cover up for her, in some way, just burned everything down. Because then he told another person how he went up on the hill close to his place in the wagon and sat there and watched the house burn. So if you had not been involved in that and you were a neighbor, you would have gone down to see what you could do. Yeah. So Nate doesn't come out looking real good. And some people do think he did it. In fact, the one cousin of Dad's, Maud, she really wanted me to write a book that said that he did it, but I could not do that. Not with my co-author, so. Yeah. Yeah, Lauren.
One nagging question I have is, I reconcile or understand how, even with forensics back then, how you could look at a body and not know if it's human or animal. The bones are completely different. Wouldn't it have to have been completely almost just incinerate, like only ashes left to not know?
Yeah, I don't know, it was, as I was told, it was like the midriff, like maybe her, like around her hips was all that was left. Yeah,
Okay.
so, yeah, I don't know, it was Peebler Undertaker out of Topeka that was in charge. The night, it was May, it was, cold and rainy and freezing, and it was hard to get in and out of the place. So they took the three bodies back there. And they just said it was just, that what was left of that body, there was, again, that's what they said. Reported,
Very little of it.
they reported in the newspapers, there was so little, they really couldn't determine if it was her or if it was even people, so, yeah. But it's a good point, Lauren. Yeah. So they did have this triple funeral, and as a pastor, I was interested in that. When Sam and I were there, we went to the Methodist church. It wasn't the same building, but we were able to worship with that same congregation on the same property where those folks welcomed them in, because they actually belonged to Grantville United Methodist Church, which was further south and smaller. So, excuse me, just to be there and in some way say, gratitude to them, to God, for welcoming them, because you read in the book, you can imagine people were outside, they didn't have any room for anybody, and then it was like a mile-long cavalcade, a mile-long procession up to the cemetery because the family was so well known, so, yeah. But then as a pastor, for me, I have hope and I have assurance for life after this. And so I do not know what their relationship was like with the Lord, or about forgiveness, or who was responsible for what, but for me, their death is not the end. They go on, they live on, they have eternal being, so, yeah. Yeah, Lauren.
How has writing this book affected you? Changed thoughts or?
For one thing, it's helped me feel closer to people that I never really knew, because I learned more about them. I guess I got over the drama and the details. I was raised, went to school as a journalist. I could never be the kind of journalist that the KC Star would crank out, that could go stick a microphone in your face right after you had a family event. But I could distance myself enough from it that I could look at the facts and try to make them, I guess, come alive again through the book, to have life again. So it was definitely different than anything I'd ever done, because I was like a magazine article writer. So probably the longest thing I've written was 3 or 4 pages, unless it was maybe some short story. It's a whole lot different to write a book and then to try to weave somebody else's story in. And the whole book it begins with the coming in of this Lake Perry, and how that forces old Nate out of his shack in the country that was up on the hill. And then he goes to town, and then he forms this relationship with Lila, and I know he received, his life was enriched, blessed by being with her and Charlie. She took care of him, and mourned his death when he passed. So he had more added value and meaning to his life because of that, so this is also the story for that part of Kansas. If you can think of tragedies that have happened in Newton or where you're from, it's something that you have lived with. So their family members, even if they obviously weren't alive then, but this is something for their family members. These were their friends and neighbors, so it affected them. So I also wanted to do it for them, to encapsulate that in story. So, yeah. But probably the neatest thing for me was just interviewing some of these people, like the one guy who introduced, Ernest, the youngest brother, to his wife at some dance at the Huber School. You know, I love hearing stories like that. Yeah.
Any knowledge of what happened to Jenny's many fiancés, multiple fiancés?
Well, they had interviewed the guy that was a railroader up in Iowa or Nebraska, and you can imagine he was stunned. I think he had read the news or somebody had told him, but then to have the police contact you. Oh, you just sent this package to this woman. Do you know anything about this? Or what happened when you were there? So, Lon Myers married. He actually was married before, and then he married twice after Jennie. And he had 2 children, and I have talked to and just emailed last night a great grandson. And, so I told somebody here earlier, he came to Oskaloosa and we talked, and he said, we were almost related. Yeah, so, that would be, old Nate's, no, I'm sorry, that would have been Lon Myers' family. I have not contacted anybody from old Nate's family. The other ones, I have absolutely no idea, to be honest, you know, so. But I think there was a report, that came from Lila about the man that was the mailman who would drive by. And he would report to his wife how he got a little thrill when he would drive by the house and her undergarments would be hanging on the you know, so she obviously didn't care that people saw that. And again, all those little stories that I heard that I tried to weave in, I think it really makes it meaningful and colorful. Yeah.
Did her rings show up or were they destroyed in the fire?
Very good question. So people went through the ashes. They went down there with like, sifters or what we might use in the kitchen. Kids were digging around with sticks and they were doing it almost right after. So they were destroying possible evidence. But nobody ever found them. Nobody ever found the ring. So Lila's explanation that it seems like Nate may have told this to her was that he thought they were just paste samples. Well, I don't think that probably was the case because we just had this real ring that comes, right? So, either somebody grabbed them and ran. I mean, I think that's probably the explanation. There was a coffee can that had Sunday school money in it that nobody took.
Oh.
So if it was Jennie, at least she didn't take the Sunday school money. Also, her dad had a little bag of gold dust and a metal clock. He had been in Colorado and apparently got struck a little rich, and he used it kind of as insurance. And I don't know that anybody ever found that, but that probably somewhere in the fire. So people are, like I said, people are still digging up things, but yeah. So I think they went away. I don't know who took them. I think they went away.
What about other valuables? Land, did the family own the land?
Yeah.
Where it landed? Or
Yeah.
where-
So that's really interesting, because then there's a whole nother story after this. And I found a file in the Jefferson County Courthouse about this thick with all kinds of documentation. And basically one side of the family, like my grandpa's sisters and brothers, sued the other side of the family because the way it turned out, the will had just been rewritten right before this. And he had deeded the land solely, I believe, to Uncle Ernest because he had taken care of him. And then Jennie was supposed to get maybe $700, $1,000, if he had died before her. Also found contents of her will or whatever they found. There wasn't much that was left because it was all in fire. But so, yeah, it was contested, half the family between the other half. So, in high emotions, we know families can really start going at each other. So the way that it was written was that this new bride of maybe 3 weeks of Ernest was supposed to get basically everything, because Jennie she wasn't married, she had no heirs. And whatever she was supposed to receive, that $700 or $1,000 would be split among her 13 brothers and sisters. So there was all this going back and forth, and I think there were 3 guys that were appointed to be, what do they call them?
Executive.
Trustees or something, yeah. And I think they all quit. Because there was so much conflict, and some of the women in this family were not especially pleasant to deal with, I would say. So as it ended up, she did not get it all. The family got a little more, but I think they mostly did rule in her favor. There was an auction of what was left, things in the barn. And like canned goods in the cellar, which is interesting, go into the documents at the courthouse and read all that, but she did receive a lot of that. Everything she owned basically was in that house because she was teaching clear over here in Florence, and Ernest would go pick her up. Yeah, Ernest would go pick her up in the family car, and like on a Sunday and on a Friday and take her back to the farm. And then she would stay there over the weekend, and then he would drive her on Sunday afternoon back to Florence. And
Wow.
yeah, and I think they had some little service for her afterward that I found in the newspaper. So yeah, and I talked to her, I think half brother. He said, you gotta remember everything, practically everything she owned and all her wedding presents and everything were in that house. All she had was basically what she had packed, for a week. Yeah, so. Yeah, and she did later marry and have kids, so. Yeah, there was some, life goes on for people after these things, eventually. Yeah. Other questions?
Who are you talking about just now?
Ernest's wife.
Ernest's wife, her name was Holly.
Okay.
Holly Cook. And that was double tragedy, if you can imagine, being married 3 weeks and you're in your 20s, and then your new groom dies very suddenly, tragically, yeah. So. Yeah. Okay.
Thank you let's give her a round of applause.